Welcome to Saga Dream Tales, the place where you can relax, unwind, and drift into calm stories shaped by ancient world. Here, every tale moves slowly, carried by soft words and peaceful rhythm, made to ease your mind and guide you into a quiet space. In today's journey, we turn our gaze toward Asgard, the high home of the Aesir, and the edges of Jotunheim, the wild land of giants, to trace the lineage of a figure essential to both. Loki. His presence is a current of quicksilver and shifting light, a necessary foil in the halls of the god. We will uncover his curious origins and the complex, binding ties he shares with those who rule. His story is one of dualities, of fire and frost, of deep loyalty and cunning deceit. All you need to do now is sit back, breathe deeply, and let the story unfold at its own slow pace. Close your eyes if you wish, let your body settle into comfort, and allow yourself to be carried away to a time when gods and giants wove the very fabric of existence, and one being held the key to both laughter and ruin. The journey begins now, in the time before time was counted, in the age when the world was young, and the gods walked between the realms. There lived a being unlike any other. His name was Loki, and his story begins not in the golden halls of Asgard, but in the cold and ancient lands of the giant. Long ago, when the 9 worlds were still finding their shape, there was a giant named Farboti. His name meant dangerous striker, and he was a being of storms and wild wind. He lived in the realm of the giants, that cold place called Jotunheim, where mountains reached up to scrape the sky and ice covered the ground for much of the year. Farboti took as his wife a giantess named Loki, though some called her Nal. Her name meant leafy isle or needle, and she was slender like the trees that bent in the wind. She was not like the other giant women, who were often large and fearsome. Loki was different, graceful and quick, with eyes that seemed to see more than what was merely in front of her. From this union of storm and leaf, of lightning and tree, came a son. He was born on a cold night, when the northern lights danced across the sky in sheets of green and blue. The child came into the world smaller than other giant babies, with features more delicate than those of his kind. His hair was red like fire, and his eyes were sharp and bright, always moving, always watching. They named him Loki. Some say his name meant close or lock, as if he were meant to close or conclude something. Others believe it came from an older word meaning flame or fire, for there was something burning in his nature, something that could not be contained or controlled. From his earliest days, Loki was different from his brothers. While other young giants grew large and strong, delighting in tests of strength and battles with stones and trees, Loki remained slight and quick. He could not win at wrestling or lifting, but his mind was sharp as any blade ever forged. Where others used force, he learned to use cleverness. Where others charged forward, he learned to slip sideways. He had brothers, other sons of Farboti and Loki. Their names were Helblindi and Beleister, and they were more like typical giants, large and powerful. They did not always understand their smaller brother, who preferred riddles to wrestling and tricks to combat. But Loki did not mind being different. In fact, he seemed to delight in it. As Loki grew, he spent much time wandering the wild places of Jotunheim. He learned the paths through the mountains, where the wind did not cut so cold. He discovered hidden valleys where hot springs bubbled up from deep in the earth, creating patches of warmth in the frozen land. He watched the animals and learned their ways. The fox taught him cunning. The raven taught him to see from above. The salmon taught him how to slip through tight spaces. But most of all, Loki learned to change. This was his greatest gift, though some would later call it a curse. He discovered that his form was not fixed like the mountains or permanent like the stars. With concentration and will, he could shift his shape, becoming other things. At first, these changes were small and difficult. He might make his hair a different color or change the sound of his voice. But with practice, he learned to do more. He became a bird and flew over the peaks of Jotunheim. He became a fish and swam in the cold rivers. He became a seal and dove deep into the icy sea. Each transformation taught him something new about the world and about himself. He learned that he was not bound by the limitations that held others. His form was fluid, like water, like flame, like the wind that changed direction with every moment. The journey to Asgard. As Loki grew older, he began to hear stories of another realm, a place very different from the cold stone halls of the giant. This was Asgard, the realm of the gods, where golden halls caught the light of the sun, and the people there had powers and purposes beyond mere survival. The gods of Asgard were led by Odin, called the All-Father, who ruled from his high seat and saw all that happened in the nine worlds. The giants and the gods were old enemies. Wars had been fought between them since the beginning of time. The giants represented the wild, untamed forces of nature, chaos and cold, and the crushing power of stone and ice. The gods represented order and civilization, the forces that built and created and gave shape to the world. Between them, there was distrust and hatred built up over countless ages. But Loki was curious about these gods. He had heard that they were clever, that they valued not just strength but also wisdom and skill in craft. He wondered what it would be like to walk among them, to see their golden halls, and learn their secrets. One day, when Loki had grown to his full height, though he remained smaller than most giants, he decided to journey to Asgard. He did not tell his brothers where he was going. He simply left one morning when the sun was rising over the mountains, painting the ice caps pink and gold. The journey was long, and took him through many strange places. He crossed the border between Jotunheim and Midgard, the realm of humans. There he saw small settlements where people lived in wooden houses and farmed the land. He was fascinated by these creatures, smaller even than himself, who nevertheless survived and built and created despite their weakness. They could not change shape or wield magic like the giants and gods. They simply endured, generation after generation, and in their endurance, there was a kind of strength. From Midgard, Loki found a path that led upward to Asgard. Some say it was the rainbow bridge called Bifrost that he crossed, though others tell that he found a secret way, using his cunning and his ability to change his form. However he came there, he eventually stood before the gates of Asgard, looking up at walls that seemed to touch the sky itself. The gods who guarded the gates saw him coming. They raised their weapons, for they recognized him as one of giant blood, and giants were not welcome in Asgard. But Loki did not come as an enemy. He came with empty hands and a clever tongue. He spoke to the gods, and though his words are lost to time, he convinced them to bring him before Odin himself. In the great hall of Asgard, Loki stood before the All-Father. Odin sat on his high seat, from which he could see all the worlds. He had but one eye, for he had sacrificed the other to gain wisdom. Two ravens sat on his shoulders, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, who flew out each day and brought him news from all the corners of creation. Odin looked long at Loki, and Loki looked back without fear. The All-Father saw something in this giant son, something that interested him. Perhaps he saw potential. Perhaps he saw danger. Perhaps he saw both, for Odin was wise enough to know that the most interesting things are often dangerous, and the most dangerous things are often useful. What happened next would change everything. In a ceremony whose details have been lost to time, Odin and Loki became blood brothers. They mixed their blood together and swore oaths of loyalty and friendship. From that day forward, Loki was no longer considered an enemy of Asgard. He was welcomed in the halls of the gods, a place where no giant had walked before, except as a prisoner or a corpse. Why did Odin do this? Some say he saw that Loki's cleverness would be useful to the gods. Others say he wanted to keep a potential enemy close where he could watch him. Still others believe Odin saw something in Loki that reminded him of himself. For Odin too was a wanderer and a seeker of knowledge, willing to use cunning and tricks to achieve his goals. Whatever the reason, Loki made his home in Asgard. He was not counted among the Aesir, the gods themselves, but he lived among them and was treated as one of them. The other gods were suspicious at first. How could they trust one of giant blood? But Loki proved himself useful time and again with his quick thinking and his clever solutions to problems. Life among the gods. In Asgard, Loki became known for his wit and his trick. He was not a warrior like Thor, who wielded his mighty hammer and was the strongest of all the gods. He was not wise like Odin, who spent his time seeking knowledge and understanding. He was not beautiful like Balder, who was loved by all. Instead, Loki was something different. He was the one who saw solutions where others saw only problems. He was the one who could slip into places others could not go. He was the one who could talk his way out of trouble or into opportunity. The gods soon learned that Loki could be both helpful and troublesome. He played pranks that sometimes went too far. He would cut off the golden hair of Sif, Thor's wife, just to see what would happen. He would steal Freya's necklace or hide Heimdall's horn. But when the consequences of his tricks became serious, Loki would use his cleverness to fix what he had broken, often making things better than they were before. In Asgard, Loki became close with Thor, the thunder god. They were an unlikely pair. Thor was large and powerful, straightforward and honest, quick to anger and quick to fight. Loki was slim and clever, always thinking 3 steps ahead, preferring words to weapons. Yet, they complemented each other. Thor's strength and Loki's cunning together could overcome challenges that neither could face alone. They went on many adventures together. They traveled to Jotunheim, where Loki's knowledge of the giant realm proved invaluable. They journeyed to strange places and faced strange creatures. Thor would often rush into danger with his hammer raised, while Loki would hang back and look for a clever solution. Sometimes they succeeded through Thor's might. Sometimes they succeeded through Loki's tricks. Often, they needed both. But life in Asgard was not all adventures and tricks. Loki also spent quiet time there, learning the ways of the gods, understanding their customs and their values. He learned about honor and duty, about the importance they placed on oaths and loyalty. These things were different from what he had known in Jotunheim, where survival was the highest law and strength was the only currency that mattered. He watched the gods in their daily lives. He saw how they feasted in the Great Hall, how they practiced their skills in combat, how they discussed matters of importance. He learned that they were not so different from giants in many ways. They too had their conflicts and jealousies. They too struggled with questions of right and wrong. They too made mistakes and tried to fix them. Loki also learned about the fate that hung over Asgard. He heard the prophecies of Ragnarok, the doom of the gods, when everything would end in fire and ice, when the gods would fight their final battle against the forces of chaos. These prophecies troubled him, for they spoke of his own children as instruments of that doom. But that part of the story comes later. Hush, hush, the family he made. As time passed, Loki lived 2 lives. In Asgard, he was the blood brother of Odin, the companion of Thor, the clever one who solved problems and played tricks. But he also journeyed often to other realms, for he could not quite settle in one place. His nature was restless, always moving, always changing. On one of his journeys to Jotunheim, Loki met a giantess named Angrboda. Her name meant bringer of grief, or she who offers sorrow, and she lived in the dark forests on the edge of the giant realm. She was a sorceress, skilled in the old magic, the magic that existed before the gods came to power. She could see things that would come to pass, though the visions came to her in fragments and shadows. Angrboda was unlike anyone Loki had known. She did not care for the games of the gods or the politics of Asgard. She lived according to older laws, the laws of nature itself, wild and untamed. She understood Loki in ways that others did not. She saw his dual nature, neither fully giant nor fully friend of the gods, and she did not judge him for it. Loki and Angrboda became companions. From their union came 3 children, each one strange and powerful in their own way. These children would become famous throughout all the 9 worlds, though their fame would be dark and terrible. The first child was Fenrir, a wolf. But this was no ordinary wolf. From the moment of his birth, it was clear that Fenrir would grow to enormous size. Even as a pup, he was larger than any normal wolf, with teeth like daggers and eyes that glowed with intelligence and hunger. Loki looked at his son and felt both pride and unease, for he could sense the great power that lay dormant in the young wolf. The second child was Jormungandr, a serpent. This child was born long and sinuous, with scales that gleamed like metal and a tongue that flickered constantly, tasting the air. As with Fenrir, Jormungandr was destined to grow far beyond normal size. Even in his early days, the serpent showed signs of the monster he would become. The third child was different still. This was Hel, a daughter. But Hel was born with a divided nature, split down the middle of her body. On one side, she was beautiful, with fair skin and bright eyes. On the other side, she was like a corpse, pale and decaying, more dead than alive. She was quiet and strange, this daughter, neither fully living nor fully dead, existing in a state between. Loki loved his children, though they frightened even him. He understood what it meant to be different, to not fit into the world as it was made. His children were more than different. They were other, something new, something that the world had never seen before. For a time, Loki kept his children secret. He and Angerboda raised them in the forests of Jotunheim, away from the eyes of the gods. But children, especially unusual children, cannot be kept secret forever. Stories began to spread. Travelers spoke of seeing a wolf, the size of a horse. Fishermen reported a serpent so large it could coil around a ship. And whispers came of a girl who was both alive and dead. Eventually, the gods learned of Loki's children. Odin, who saw much from his high seat, grew concerned when he heard the prophecies about them. The seers and wise women spoke of these children, saying they would bring great destruction when the end times came. Fenrir would break free from his bonds and devour the sun. Jormungandr would rise from the ocean and poison the sky. Hel would lead an army of the dead. Odin decided that these children were too dangerous to remain free. He sent gods to Jotunheim to bring them to Asgard. Loki was away when they came, and Angerboda could not stop them. The gods took the 3 children and brought them before Odin. What happened next filled Loki with rage and grief. Odin looked at the 3 unusual children and decided their fate. He could not bring himself to kill them, for they were still young and had done no wrong. But neither could he let them remain free, not with the prophecies hanging over them. Jormungandr, the serpent, Odin cast into the great ocean that surrounded Midgard. The serpent fell through the air and plunged into the deep waters. There he would grow and grow, feeding on the fish and whales, until he became so large that he circled the entire world and could grasp his own tail in his mouth. He became known as the world serpent, and sailors feared to venture too far from shore lest they encounter him. Hel, the half-dead daughter, Odin sent to the underworld. He gave her dominion over a realm of the dead, a place where those who died of sickness or old age would come. It was not the glorious hall of Valhalla where warriors went, but a quieter, darker place. Hel accepted this role and became the ruler of her realm, judging the dead and keeping order in the land of shadows. Her realm came to be called by her name, Hel, and it was said that none who entered could ever leave. Fenrir, the wolf, posed the greatest problem. He was still young, but already he was enormous, and he continued to grow. Odin decided to keep the wolf in Asgard, where they could watch him. The gods tried to make friends with Fenrir, feeding him and giving him space to run. Only Tyr, the god of war and justice, was brave enough to feed the wolf personally, placing meat directly into those massive jaws. But Fenrir continued to grow. Soon he was so large that the gods became frightened. They decided he must be bound. They told Fenrir it was a game, a test of his strength. They created a chain called Liding and challenged the wolf to break free from it. Fenrir agreed, and when they bound him with the chain, he broke it easily with a single flex of his muscles. The gods pretended to be impressed. They tried again with a stronger chain called Dromi. This one was twice as strong as the first. Again, Fenrir allowed himself to be bound, and again he broke free, though this time he had to struggle a bit. The gods grew more worried. Finally, they asked the dwarfs, the master craftsmen who lived under the mountains, to create a binding that could hold Fenrir. The dwarfs made something called Gleipnir. It looked delicate, like a silk ribbon, but it was made from 6 impossible things: the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. Because these things did not exist, the ribbon made from them was stronger than any chain. When the gods brought this ribbon to Fenrir and challenged him to break it, the wolf became suspicious. It looked too weak, too much like a trick. Fenrir said he would only allow himself to be bound if one of the gods would place their hand in his mouth as a pledge of good faith. If this was truly just a game, then there would be no harm. But if it was a trap, then the wolf would at least take one of them with him. The gods looked at each other. None wanted to sacrifice their hand. Finally, Tyr stepped forward. He was the god who had fed Fenrir, the only one the wolf trusted even a little. Tyr placed his right hand, his sword hand, between Fenrir's jaws. They bound Fenrir with Gleipnir. The wolf struggled to break free, but this time, the binding held. The more he struggled, the tighter it became. When Fenrir realized he had been tricked, he bit down. Tyr lost his hand at the wrist, and the wolf's jaws snapped shut on it. The gods placed Fenrir on an island far from Asgard, bound with the magical ribbon. They put a sword in his mouth to keep it propped open, so his howls of rage would not deafen them. There, the wolf would remain, until the end of the world, growing ever larger, his hatred growing with him. When Loki learned what had been done to his children, his heart grew dark. He understood why the gods feared them. He even understood that the prophecies made them dangerous, but they were still his children, and they had done nothing wrong. They had been punished for things they had not yet done, might never do, for a fate that perhaps could have been avoided. This was the first great wound between Loki and the gods, though not the last. He did not speak of it openly, but something changed in him. The tricks he played became sharper, more cruel. The help he gave became more grudging. A part of him perhaps began to wonder if the prophecies were inevitable, if the gods had created their own doom by how they treated his children. Hush, hush, the wife who remained. Despite the darkness that came from his children with Angrboda, Loki's life in Asgard continued. He had not left the realm of the gods, though his relationship with them had grown more complicated. And in time, he found companionship of a different kind. In Asgard, there lived a goddess named Sigyn. She was not one of the major gods, not one whose name was spoken in every hall, or whose deeds were carved into standing stone. She was gentle and kind, loyal and patient, all the things that Loki was not. Where he was quick to anger and quick to change, she was steady. Where he was restless, always moving from place to place, she was content to remain. Where he was clever and tricky, she was honest and straightforward. Why Sigyn came to love Loki, none could quite understand. Perhaps she saw something in him that others missed. Perhaps she believed she could be a stabilizing force in his chaotic life. Perhaps she simply loved him for reasons that needed no explanation, as love often does. Loki and Sigyn were married in Asgard, in a ceremony witnessed by the gods. From their union came 2 sons, Nafi and Vali. These children were unlike Loki's children with Angrboda. They were normal, neither monsters nor magical creatures. They were simply boys who grew up in the halls of Asgard playing and learning like any other children of the gods. Loki loved these sons too, though perhaps he loved them differently than he loved his strange first children. Nafi and Vali represented a normal life, a chance to be simply a father, without the complications of prophecy and doom hanging over them. Sigyn was patient with Loki's nature. She understood that he could not be tamed or chained. She did not try to make him into something he was not. When he went on his journeys, she waited for his return. When he played his tricks, she did not scold him but merely shook her head. When he got into trouble, she helped him find his way out of it. In Sigyn, Loki found something he had not known he needed: acceptance. She knew everything about him, all his faults and flaws, all his secrets and shames, and she remained by his side anyway. In a world where he often felt he did not belong, neither fully giant nor fully god, Sigyn was his home. But even this could not completely settle Loki's restless spirit. He still wandered. He still played tricks. He still got into situations that caused trouble for himself and others. And one of these troubles would become one of his most famous adventures. Hash Hash, the Wall of Asgard. The story begins with a problem facing the gods. Asgard, for all its beauty and power, was vulnerable. The realm had a wall around it, but that wall had been damaged in the old wars between the gods and the giants. There were gaps and broken places where enemies could enter. The gods knew they needed a proper wall, one that was high and strong and complete, one that would keep them safe from the giants and any other threat. But building such a wall was an enormous task. It would take many years and require more labor than the gods wanted to commit. They had other things to do. battles to fight, knowledge to seek, worlds to manage. They discussed the problem in their great hall, but could find no good solution. Then one day, a stranger came to Asgard. He was a large man, a builder, who said he had heard of their need for a wall. He claimed he could build them a wall that would be unbreakable, higher than the tallest giant and stronger than the deepest mountain root. And he said he could do it in a single winter. The gods were intrigued but skeptical. Such a wall would normally take decades to build. How could one man, even a skilled builder, complete it in just a few months? They asked him his price for this work. The builder told them what he wanted. In payment for building the wall, he demanded the sun and the moon, those lights that illuminated the sky. And he also wanted Freya, the most beautiful of the goddesses, as his wife. The gods were shocked by these demands. The sun and the moon? Freya? These were impossible prices. Without the sun and moon, the world would be plunged into darkness, and Freya was not theirs to give away. The idea was absurd, and they began to send the builder away. But Loki spoke up. He had been thinking while the others argued. He proposed a counteroffer. They would agree to the builder's terms, but with one condition. The builder must complete the wall entirely by himself, with no help from any man, and he must finish it by the first day of summer. If even one stone was not in place by that deadline, he would receive no payment at all. The other gods looked at Loki as if he had gone mad. But Loki continued. The task was impossible, he explained. No one man could build such a wall in such a short time. The builder would work through the winter and make progress, certainly. They would get a good portion of the wall built for free. But when summer came and the wall was still incomplete, they would owe him nothing. They would win a partial wall at no cost. The builder thought about this. Finally, he asked if he could at least have the help of his horse, a stallion named Svadilfari. The gods discussed this among themselves. A horse was not a man, after all. How much help could a horse really be? They agreed to this condition. So, the agreement was made. The builder would construct the wall completely by himself, with only his horse to help, and he would finish by the first day of summer. If he succeeded, he would receive the sun, the moon, and Freya as his bride. If he failed by even a single stone, he would receive nothing. The builder began his work the very next day. The gods watched as he started laying stones, and they were impressed by his skill. But they were not worried. Surely the task was too great. Surely summer would come before the wall was complete. But as the days passed, the gods began to grow concerned. The builder worked with incredible speed and skill, and his horse, Svadilfari, was like no normal horse. The stallion was huge and powerful, able to drag massive stones that would normally require a dozen oxen. During the night, while the builder rested, the horse continued to work, hauling stones from the quarry to the building site. Week after week, the wall grew. The builder worked through snow and ice, never stopping, never slowing. His hands moved with precision, placing each stone perfectly. And Svadilfari hauled, load after load, seemingly never tiring. Winter wore on, and the wall continued to rise. The gods began to realize that they had made a terrible mistake. The builder was going to succeed. By the time summer came, the wall would be complete. They would lose the sun and the moon. The world would fall into darkness, and Freya would be taken away. As the last days of winter approached, panic set in among the gods. They gathered in their hall and argued about what to do. Some wanted to simply attack the builder and drive him away, but Odin pointed out that they had made an oath. To break it would bring shame upon them and might anger forces even greater than themselves. The gods turned their anger toward Loki. This was his idea, they said. He was the one who had convinced them to make this bargain. He had assured them it was impossible. Now, he must fix it. If he could not find a way to stop the builder from finishing the wall, then Loki would suffer greatly. They threatened him with terrible punishments if he failed. Loki left that gathering with fear in his heart. He had only 3 days to find a solution. The wall was nearly complete, lacking only the stones around the gate. If the builder continued at his current pace, he would finish in time. That night, Loki went to where the builder and Svadilfari were working. He watched them from the shadows, thinking, the man was skilled, yes, but the real key to his progress was the horse. That incredible stallion that could do the work of many animals, that never seemed to tire or slow. Then Loki knew what he had to do. He waited until the next evening, when the builder had sent Svadilfari to the quarry to fetch another load of stone. The night was dark, and the horse was alone as he pulled his heavy load. Loki changed his form. He took the shape of a mare, a female horse. And this mare was young and beautiful, with a coat that gleamed even in the darkness. She appeared at the edge of the forest and called out to Svadilfari. The stallion saw the mare and stopped. He had worked all winter without rest, without any distraction. Now here was this beautiful mare, calling to him. Svadilfari abandoned his load of stones and went toward her. The mare ran into the forest, and Svadilfari followed. Deeper into the trees they went, farther from the wall and the waiting builder. All through the night, the stallion chased the mare, and the mare stayed just ahead of him, leading him on. When morning came, the builder discovered that his horse had not returned. The stones were still at the quarry. He went searching and found the empty harness and no sign of Svadilfari. Precious time was wasted as he searched. Finally, the stallion returned, exhausted from his night in the forest. But half a day had been lost, and that was time the builder could not afford. He tried to make up for it, working even faster, pushing himself and his horse harder. But the damage was done. The next night, the same thing happened. The beautiful mare appeared again, and again Svadilfari could not resist following her. Another night was lost, another day of work gone. On the final day of winter, with only hours remaining before summer began, the builder worked desperately to place the last stones. But he could not work fast enough. When the first day of summer arrived, when the first ray of the new season's sun touched the top of the wall, there were still stones missing from around the gate. The builder had failed. In his rage and frustration, the builder's disguise fell away. For he had not been a man at all, but a giant in disguise, a stone giant from the mountains of Jotunheim. He had hoped to trick the gods, to weaken them by taking away the sun and moon, to take Freya back to the giant realm. When Thor saw that a giant had been in Asgard, had dared to ask for Freya and the sun and moon, his rage was terrible. He seized his hammer Mjolnir and struck the giant down with a single blow. The giant fell dead, and the threat was ended. The gods had their wall, or most of it. The gaps around the gate were later filled by the gods themselves, taking only a little time. They were safe behind their high, strong wall, and they had paid nothing for it. But there was one more consequence to this story. Months later, Loki gave birth to a foal. For when he had taken the form of a mare to lead Svadilfari astray, nature had taken its course. The foal was unusual, born with 8 legs instead of 4. He was grey as a storm cloud and faster than any horse that had ever lived. Loki gave this 8-legged horse to Odin, and the All-Father named him Sleipnir. This horse became Odin's mount, able to carry him across the sky and even between the worlds. Sleipnir could run across the sea and through the air, and no distance was too far for him. So in the end, the gods gained a wall, and Odin gained the greatest horse in all the world. But Loki gained something too. He had proven once again that his cleverness could save the gods when strength alone could not. Yet, he had also shown that his methods were strange, and sometimes disturbing. The memory of how Sleipnir came to be was not something the gods spoke of often. The gifts for the gods. Loki's tricks did not always begin with malice. Sometimes they started almost as jokes, as impulses he could not quite control. One such moment led to another famous adventure. One morning, Thor awoke to find his wife Sif crying. Her beautiful golden hair that was famous throughout all the realms for its beauty, had been cut off in the night. Someone had sheared it all away, leaving her nearly bald. Thor's rage was instant and terrible. He knew immediately who must have done that. Only Loki would play such a cruel trick, sneaking into their chamber in the night and cutting off Sif's pride and joy. Thor stormed through Asgard until he found Loki, and he grabbed the trickster by the throat. Loki admitted what he had done, for there was no point in denying it. But he begged Thor not to kill him. He promised he would fix everything. He would get new hair for Sif, hair even more beautiful than before. Hair made of real gold, that would grow like natural hair. He swore this on his life, and Thor reluctantly agreed to give him a chance. Loki knew there was only one place where such a wonder could be made. He traveled down from Asgard, down through Midgard, down into the deep places under the mountains where the dwarfs lived. These were the sons of Ivaldi, master craftsmen, who could work metal and stone in ways that seemed like magic. The dwarfs lived in caves and tunnels, lit by forges that burned with heat from the heart of the earth. They were small beings, smaller than humans, with strong hands and keen eyes. They could see the hidden properties in metals, could coax gold and silver and iron into shapes and purposes that no one else could imagine. Loki came to the sons of Ivaldi and told them what he needed. He spoke of Sif's beauty and how the golden hair would restore it. The dwarfs, who took pride in their work, agreed to help. They loved challenges, loved creating things that had never existed before. They set to work at their forges. The fire roared and the hammers rang. They took gold, pure and soft, and they worked it with their secret art. They spun it into strands fine as silk but strong as wire. They wove these strands together into hair that flowed like water and caught the light like sunshine. But the dwarfs did not stop there. They were in the mood to create, and once begun, they found it hard to stop. While the forge was hot and their tools were ready, they made two other treasures. The first was a spear called Gungnir. This spear was perfectly balanced, perfectly straight, and it had a special property. Once thrown, it would never miss its mark. It would always find its target, no matter how far or how difficult the shot. The dwarfs thought this would be a worthy gift for Odin, the ruler of the god. The second item was a ship called Skidbladnir. This was no ordinary ship. It was large enough to carry all the gods and their weapons when it was unfolded. But it could also be folded up small enough to fit in a pocket or pouch. And whenever its sail was raised, the wind would always blow favorably, no matter which direction the ship needed to go. The dwarfs thought this would be a fine gift for Freyr, the god of fertility and prosperity. Loki was amazed by these treasures. He thanked the sons of Ivaldi and prepared to return to Asgard with the golden hair and the other gifts. But as he was leaving the dwarf realm, he passed by another forge, where two dwarf brothers named Brokkr and Eitri were working. Loki, who could never resist stirring up competition and mischief, stopped to speak with them. He showed them the three treasures made by the sons of Ivaldi, and casually mentioned that probably no one could craft anything better. These were certainly the finest works that dwarf hands could make. Brokkr took offense at this. He insisted that he and his brother Eitri could make 3 items that would be even more precious than those made by the sons of Ivaldi. Loki laughed at this claim. He offered a wager. If Brokkr and Eitri could indeed make 3 better gifts, then Loki would give them his own head. But if they failed, they would owe him a favor. The 2 brothers accepted the wager. Eitri was the smith, the one who would work the forge and shape the metal. Brokkr would work the bellows, pumping air to keep the fire at exactly the right heat. Eitri warned his brother that the timing was crucial. The fire must never grow too hot or too cool. Brokkr must keep pumping the bellows steadily, without stopping, no matter what happened. Eitri placed a pigskin in the forge and told his brother to pump while he spoke the spells that would shape the work. Then Eitri left the forge room, trusting his brother to maintain the fire perfectly. As soon as Eitri was gone, a fly came buzzing into the room. It was large and annoying, and it flew around Brokkr's head. The dwarf ignored it and kept pumping. The fly landed on his hand and bit him. But Brokkr did not stop pumping. He would not break his concentration or disturb the work. When Eitri returned, he pulled from the forge a golden boar. This creature was alive, made entirely of gold, and it could run faster than any horse. Its bristles glowed in the dark, lighting up the night. They named it Gullinbursti, the golden bristled one, and decided it would be a gift for Freyr. For the second working, Eitri placed gold in the forge and again instructed his brother to pump without stopping. Again he left the room. Again, the fly appeared. This time, it landed on Brokkr's neck and bit him twice as hard as before. The pain was sharp, but the dwarf gritted his teeth and kept pumping, never changing his rhythm. When Eitri returned, he drew from the forge a golden ring called Dropnir. This ring had a wondrous property. Every ninth night, 8 new rings of equal weight and purity would drip from it, creating more gold. It was a source of endless wealth. This, they decided, would be for Odin. For the third and final item, Atri placed iron in the forge. This would be the most difficult working of all. He gave his brother even stronger warnings about keeping the bellows going, then left the room once more. The fly returned, and this time it was more vicious than before. For this was no ordinary fly at all, but Loki in disguise, trying to ruin the work and win his wager. The fly landed on Brokka's eyelid and bit down hard, so hard that blood ran down into the dwarf's eye, blinding him. Brokka's hand twitched, just for a moment, as he tried to brush away the blood. The bellows missed half a stroke, but then he recovered and continued, pumping until his brother returned. Eitri pulled from the forge a mighty hammer. The handle was shorter than it should have been, because of that moment when the bellows had faltered. But the head was perfect, strong and heavy and balanced. This hammer had special properties. It would never break, no matter how hard it struck. When thrown, it would always return to the hand of the thrower, and it could be shrunk down to be carried inside a shirt. They named the hammer Mjolnir, and they knew it would be perfect for Thor, who was the strongest of the gods and needed the mightiest weapon. Loki returned to his normal form, disappointed that his interference had not completely ruined the work. The handle was short, yes, but the hammer was still magnificent. He tried to convince Brokkr that the wager should be void because the hammer was flawed, but the dwarf would not agree. They would let the gods decide which gifts were better. So they all traveled to Asgard, Loki with his 3 treasures and Brokkr with his. The gods assembled in a great hall to judge the gifts. Each item was presented and its properties explained. Loki gave the golden hair to Sif, and when she placed it on her head, it rooted itself and began to grow as if it were her own natural hair. She was beautiful again, and Thor's anger was appeased. The spear Gungnir was given to Odin, and he was pleased with a weapon that would never miss. The ship Skidbladnir went to Freya, who marveled at how it could fold and unfold. Then Brokkr presented his gifts. The golden boar Gullinbursti went to Freyr as well, giving him a mount that could outrun any horse and light his way in darkness. The ring Dropnir went to Odin, who appreciated the endless wealth it would generate, and the hammer Mjolnir went to Thor. When Thor lifted the hammer, even though its handle was shorter than ideal, he knew immediately that this was the greatest weapon ever made. With this, he could defend Asgard against any threat. He could fight the giants and monsters that threatened the gods. The short handle mattered little. The gods voted, and they agreed that Brokkr and Eitri had created the more valuable gift. The hammer Mjolnir alone was worth more than all the other treasures combined, for it was the best defense Asgard had against their enemies. Brokkr demanded his prize. Loki had wagered his head, and the gods agreed the dwarf had won. But Loki's quick mind found a loophole. He agreed his head belonged to Brokkr, but pointed out that his neck had not been part of the wager. Brokkr could take the head, but he must not damage the neck in doing so. This was impossible, of course, and the gods laughed at Loki's cleverness even as they shook their heads at his trickery. Brokkr could not claim his prize without violating the exact terms of the wager. The dwarf was furious, but he had to accept this. However, he declared that if he could not take Loki's head, he would at least punish him for his interference, for he knew it had been Loki, as the fly, who had tried to ruin the work. Brokkr took a leather strap and an awl, and he sewed Loki's lips shut so the trickster could not talk his way out of any more situations. For a while, Loki walked around Asgard with his lips sewn closed, unable to speak, but eventually he managed to break the stitches and free his mouth. The scars remained for a time as a reminder of what had happened. From this adventure, the gods gained many of their greatest treasures. Odin had his spear and ring. Thor had his hammer, which would be used to defend Asgard countless times. Freyr had his ship and boar. Sif had her golden hair. These were gifts that came from Loki's mischief and his cleverness in equal measure. The nature of the trickster. Time passed in Asgard as it always did, measured by the journeys of the sun and moon across the sky, by the changing of seasons, by the cycles of planting and harvest in Midgard below. Loki remained among the gods, neither fully trusted nor fully rejected, always occupying a space between. He was useful to them. When problems arose that could not be solved by strength or wisdom alone, Loki often found solutions. When Thor's hammer was stolen by a giant named Thrym, it was Loki who devised the plan to get it back, convincing Thor to disguise himself as a bride to trick the giant. When the gods needed information from their enemies, Loki was the one who could slip into places unnoticed or talk his way past guard. But he was also a source of problems. His tricks sometimes went too far. His jokes sometimes caused real harm. There was a darkness in him that seemed to grow over time, a bitterness that came from being neither one thing nor another, neither fully giant nor fully god, always on the outside looking in. Loki understood things that other gods did not. He understood the perspective of the giants, for he had been born among them. He understood the view of the outsider, for he had always been one. He saw the flaws in the gods, their pride and prejudice, their certainty that they were righteous and their enemies were evil. He knew that the world was more complicated than simple stories of good and evil. He had seen the gods do cruel things and call them just. He had seen them make decisions based on fear rather than wisdom. He remembered what they had done to his children, punishing them for prophecies rather than crimes. Yet Loki also saw the good in the gods. He saw Odin's endless pursuit of knowledge, the sacrifices the All-Father made to understand the world better. He saw Thor's genuine desire to protect the innocent and fight for those who could not fight for themselves. He saw the beauty they created, the order they brought to chaos, the light they maintained against the darkness. Loki lived in the space between these truths. He could see both sides, understand both perspectives, and this made him neither fully loyal to the gods nor fully aligned with their enemy. This made him dangerous, for someone who sees all sides may end up choosing none. In his quieter moments, when he was at home with Sigyn and their sons, Loki was different. He could be gentle there. He could be at peace. Sigyn did not demand that he be anything other than what he was. She accepted his dual nature, his contradictions, his complexity. But those quiet moments came less often as time went on. Loki was called away on adventures, on missions, on tasks that required his unique skills. He spent more time traveling between the worlds, more time dealing with the problems of the gods, less time in simple domesticity. The other gods treated him with a mixture of reliance and suspicion. They needed him, but they did not truly welcome him. They used his skills, but they did not honor him as they honored their own. In feasts and celebrations, he was present but apart, included but not embraced. Thor was perhaps his closest friend among them, but even that relationship was complicated. Thor represented everything Loki was not: straightforward, honest, powerful in obvious ways. Thor never had to use tricks or lies because he could solve problems with his strength and his hammer. Yet Thor also relied on Loki, needed his cleverness to complement his might. There were times when they laughed together, when they shared the satisfaction of a challenge overcome or an enemy defeated. There were times when they seemed like true brothers, bound by affection and shared experience. But there were also times when Thor's frustration with Loki's methods showed through. When the thunder god would have preferred a straight fight to a clever trick. Odin's relationship with Loki was even more complex. The All-Father had made Loki his blood brother, had brought him into Asgard, had trusted him with important tasks. But Odin also watched Loki carefully, always aware that the trickster was unpredictable, potentially dangerous. Odin understood Loki in some ways better than anyone else, for Odin himself was no stranger to tricks and deception. The All-Father often disguised himself and walked among the other worlds in various forms. He gathered knowledge through cunning as much as through direct inquiry. He knew that sometimes the ends justified questionable means. But Odin also saw what Loki could become. From his high seat, with his ability to see into the future, Odin knew pieces of what was coming. He knew the prophecies of Ragnarok, the doom of the gods. And in those prophecies, Loki played a dark role. This knowledge colored how Odin treated Loki. The All-Father was kind, but cautious, friendly, but distant. He gave Loki freedom, but kept watch. He trusted Loki with tasks, but never with ultimate power. It was a relationship built on mutual need and mutual wariness. The other gods followed Odin's lead. They worked with Loki when necessary, but they never fully welcomed him into their inner circle. At the great feasts in Valhalla, Loki sat at the table, but often at the end, away from the seats of honor. In councils and discussions, his voice was heard, but not always heeded. Loki felt this distance. He felt the way conversations would pause when he entered a room. He felt the guards that remained slightly more alert when he passed. He felt the difference between how they treated him and how they treated their own. And slowly, over the long years, this feeling accumulated. Small slights became remembered grievances. Casual dismissals became symbols of larger rejections. The memory of what was done to his children never faded, never healed. It sat in his heart like a stone, cold and heavy. But Loki did not show this growing darkness. He continued to smile and joke. He continued to help when asked. He continued to play his role in the story of the gods. Only Sigyn, perhaps, saw the change in him, saw how the light in his eyes grew harder, how his laughter sometimes sounded forced, how he held himself differently, more guarded, more defensive. She worried for him, but she did not know how to reach the place where his pain lived. She could give him peace in their home, but she could not change how the rest of Asgard saw him. She could love him, but she could not make others love him. She could accept him, but she could not make him feel accepted by the world. Hush, hush, the passing of seasons. Years turned into decades, and decades into centuries. The gods did not age as mortals did, but time still passed for them, marked by events rather than by physical decay. They celebrated their victories and mourned their losses. They dealt with threats from giants and monsters. They watched over the 9 worlds and maintained the order of existence. Through all of this, Loki remained a constant presence. He was there when Thor fought the giant Hrungnir and was nearly killed. He was there when the gods dealt with the threat of the wolf Fenrir's growing sons. He was there at feasts and councils, at battles and negotiations. His reputation grew with time. Stories were told of his cleverness, how he had saved the gods from various disasters, how his quick thinking had turned defeat into victory. But other stories were also told. Darker stories, of tricks that went wrong, of lies that caused harm, of the times when his solutions created new problems. In Midgard, among the humans, Loki became a figure in story. Sometimes he was portrayed as a helpful spirit, a clever god who aided humans against their enemies. Other times he was seen as a dangerous trickster, a being who could not be trusted, whose help always came with hidden costs. The humans built no temples to Loki. They carved no standing stones with his image. When they made sacrifices to the gods, they called on Thor for protection, on Odin for wisdom, on Freya for good harvests, on Freya for love. But they did not call on Loki, for he was too unpredictable, too likely to help in ways that might make things worse. Loki noticed this. He saw how the humans honored the other gods, but not him. It was another small hurt, another reminder that he stood apart. He told himself he did not care about the worship of humans, that their prayers and sacrifices meant nothing to him. But the exclusion stung nonetheless. In Jotunheim, among the giants, Loki was viewed with suspicion. He was one of them by birth, but he had chosen to live among the gods. He had helped the gods against the giants many times. He had used his knowledge of the giant realm to aid Asgard's interest. The giants saw him as a traitor, someone who had abandoned his own people for the enemy. When Loki visited Jotunheim, which he still did from time to time, the giants did not welcome him warmly. Some refused to speak with him at all. Others spoke to him, but with cold politeness, making clear that he was not truly one of them anymore. Only Almboda, dwelling in her dark forest, did not judge him, though even she regarded him sadly, knowing that he belonged nowhere completely. So Loki existed between worlds, between peoples, between loyalties. He was too much of a giant to be fully trusted by the gods, too much aligned with the gods to be accepted by the giant. He was helpful but dangerous, clever but unreliable, valuable but troublesome. This position might have been sustainable if it had remained static. But nothing remains static forever, least of all the heart of a being like Loki. The accumulated hurts and rejections, the memory of wrongs done, to him and his children, the constant vigilance required to maintain his position in Asgard, all of these things slowly changed him. He became more bitter. His tricks took on a sharper edge. Where once he had played pranks that were ultimately harmless, now he sometimes caused real damage. Where once he had helped the gods willingly, now he sometimes needed to be convinced or coerced. Where once he had laughed easily, now his laughter sometimes sounded cruel. The gods noticed these changes, but they did not address them directly. They continued to use Loki when they needed him, but they trusted him less. This decreased trust made Loki more resentful, which made him less trustworthy, which increased their suspicion. It was a spiral moving slowly downward, a relationship decaying over the course of many years. Only Sigyn remained constant. She saw all the changes in Loki, saw him becoming someone harder and darker, but she never wavered in her loyalty. She was there when he returned from his journeys, whether those journeys had gone well or poorly. She was there when he was frustrated or angry or hurt. She was there in the quiet moments, providing a harbor of peace in the storm of his life. Their sons, Narfi and Vali, grew older. They were good sons, neither as clever as their father nor as patient as their mother, but somewhere in between. They did not fully understand their father's nature or his struggles, but they loved him anyway. They saw him as simply their father, not as the trickster god or the giant's son, or the blood brother of Odin, just as the man who came home to them. In these relationships with his wife and sons, Loki found something worth preserving. When he was with them, he could let down the masks he wore for everyone else. He did not need to be clever or useful or entertaining. He could simply be himself, whatever that meant. But more and more, he was called away. The gods had problems that needed solving, and many of those problems required Loki's unique skills. He went on these missions, sometimes willingly, and sometimes reluctantly, and each time he returned a little more worn, a little more tired, a little further from the person he might have been. Hush, hush. The shadows gather. There came a time when the atmosphere in Asgard began to change. It was subtle at first, like a shift in the wind that you feel before you see. The gods seemed more worried, more watchful. They spoke in hushed tones about dreams and omens, about prophecies and portent. Odin spent more time on his high seat, looking out across the world. His ravens flew more frequently, bringing him news from every corner of existence. The All-Father's face grew more troubled with each passing day. The reason for this concern was Baldur, the most beloved of all the gods. Baldur was Odin's son, brother to Thor, and he was known for his beauty, his kindness, and his fairness. Everyone loved Baldur. He was pure in a way that others were not, good in a way that seemed effortless. Where others struggled with difficult choices, Baldur naturally chose right. Where others sometimes acted from selfishness or anger, Baldur acted from love and compassion. Baldur began having dreams. They were dark dreams, troubling dreams, dreams of his own death. Night after night, he woke in terror. Though he could not remember the details of what he had seen, he only knew that something terrible was coming for him. The gods grew frightened. Baldur's death would be a catastrophe. Not just because they loved him, but because the prophecies said that his death would be the first step toward Ragnarok, the end of everything. If Baldur died, it would signal the beginning of the doom of the gods. Odin rode his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, down to the realm of the dead, to consult with a dead seer. She confirmed what he feared. Baldur was in danger. Death was coming for him. But she did not tell him how to prevent it. Baldur's mother, Frigg, decided to take action. She was Odin's wife, the queen of the gods, and she would not sit by while her son was in danger. She traveled through all the worlds, speaking to everything that existed. She spoke to the animals and the plants, to the stones and the metals, to the rain and the snow and the fire and the ice. From each thing, she extracted an oath that it would not harm Baldur. Everything agreed. The sword swore it would not cut him. The spear swore it would not pierce him. Fire swore it would not burn him. Water swore it would not drown him. Every creature, every plant, every object swore that it would do no harm to Baldur. When Frigg returned, the gods tested her work. They threw things at Baldur, and nothing hurt him. They shot arrows at him, and the arrows bounced away. They struck him with swords, and the blades would not cut. It became a game, an entertainment at their feast. They would throw things at Balder and laugh as he remained unharmed, protected by all of creation. Loki watched these games with interest. He saw how happy the gods were, how relieved, how they celebrated Balder's invulnerability, and something dark stirred in him. Perhaps it was simple curiosity. Perhaps it was resentment at how much they loved Balder while barely tolerating him. Perhaps it was the old bitterness coming to the surface. He transformed himself into an old woman and went to speak with Frigg. In this disguise, he made casual conversation, asking about how Balder had become invulnerable. Frigg, not recognizing Loki, explained how she had traveled the worlds getting oaths from everything. Loki, still disguised, asked if truly everything had sworn. Surely she must have missed something. Frigg mentioned that there was one thing she had not bothered with: mistletoe. It grew west of Valhalla, and it seemed so small and harmless, too young to make an oath, too weak to cause harm. She had not thought it worth the effort. Loki left and went to where the mistletoe grew. He found it there, just as Frigg had said, a small plant with white berries, clinging to the bark of an old oak tree. He cut a branch of it and shaped it, making it into a kind of dart or arrow. He returned to Asgard, where the gods were still playing their game with Balder. Everyone was throwing things at the shining god, laughing as he remained unharmed. But Loki noticed that one god stood apart from the game. This was Hod, Balder's brother. Hod was blind and could not see to throw anything at Balder. He stood at the edge of the gathering, left out of the fun that everyone else was having. Loki approached Hod, with kindness in his voice. He offered to help the blind god participate in the game. He would guide Hod's hand, so that he too could throw something at Balder and join in the celebration of his brother's invulnerability. Hod agreed, grateful to be included. Loki placed the mistletoe dart in Hod's hand and guided his arm, showing him the direction to throw. Hod threw the mistletoe at his brother. The dart flew true. It struck Balder in the chest. And because mistletoe had never sworn an oath, because Frigg had not thought to ask it to promise, the dart pierced Balder's flesh. The most beautiful of the gods fell dead, killed by the only thing in all creation that could harm him. The laughter stopped. The celebration turned to horror. The gods rushed to Balder, but there was nothing they could do. He was dead, his spirit already leaving his body, traveling down to the realm of Hel, the underworld ruled by Loki's daughter. The grief of the gods was immense. Frigg wept as a mother weeps for a lost child. Odin's face was terrible to see, for he knew that this death meant the prophecy was coming true. The end was beginning. Thor roared with rage. All the gods mourned. They turned their attention to Hod, who stood confused and frightened, not understanding what had happened. He had only been throwing something at his brother like everyone else had been doing. Why had this killed Balder when nothing else could? Then someone noticed Loki slipping away from the gathering. Suspicions rose. Questions were asked. The truth came out about how Loki had guided Hod's hand, how he had provided the mistletoe. The gods' grief turned to fury. But Loki was already running. He knew what would happen if they caught him. He fled from Asgard, taking on various forms, hiding in the wild places. The gods pursued him, but he was clever and knew how to disappear. While Loki hid, the gods tried to bring Balder back. They sent a messenger to Hel, to the realm of the dead, to beg for Balder's return. Hel, the daughter of Loki who ruled the dead, said she would release Balder on one condition. Everything in all the worlds must weep for him. If every single thing wept for Balder, showing that he was truly universally loved, she would let him return to life. The gods sent messengers throughout all the realms. They asked everything to weep for Balder, and everything did weep. The people wept. The animals wept. The plants wept, dropping dew like tears. The stones wept, with water running over their surfaces. All of creation mourned the death of the beautiful god. But there was one who did not weep. In a cave, the messengers found a giantess who called herself Thor. When asked to weep for Balder, she refused. She said Balder had done nothing for her, and she would shed no tears for him. Let Hel keep what she held. Thor was Loki in disguise. He was the one thing in all creation that would not mourn Balder, and so Balder had to remain in the realm of the dead. The prophecy could not be undone. When the gods learned of this final treachery, their patience with Loki ended. For too long, they had tolerated his tricks, forgiven his transgressions, overlooked his crime. But this was too much. Balder's death, the death of the best of them, the death that signaled their own doom. This could not be forgiven. They hunted Loki with grim determination. He fled to the mountains, to a remote place where a waterfall tumbled into a cold stream. There, he built himself a house with doors on all sides so he could see anyone coming. During the day, he would take the form of a salmon and hide in the water. At night, he would sit by his fire and think about how the gods might catch him. One night, as he sat thinking, he took some linen thread and began to tie it into a net, trying to work out how someone might catch a fish like himself. And even as he worked, he saw far off the gods approaching, led by Odin, who could see him from his high seat. Loki threw the half-finished net into the fire to hide it, and rushed out, transforming into a salmon and leaping into the stream. But when the gods entered his house, they found the pattern of the net burned into the ashes. They understood what it was, and completed the net Loki had started. They dragged the stream with this net. Loki tried to escape, swimming ahead of it, hiding under stones, leaping over it. But the gods persisted. Finally, Thor waded into the stream and caught Loki in his hands, as the salmon tried to jump over the net one last time. Thor squeezed the fish, and that is why salmon are narrow at the tail, from where Thor's hand gripped them. Then Loki transformed back to his true form, and they had him at last. The gods' punishment was terrible. They brought Loki deep into a cave. They took his son Narfi and transformed his other son Vali into a wolf. The wolf, no longer recognizing his brother, tore Narfi apart. The gods used Narfi's entrails, his own son's guts, as chains to bind Loki to 3 rocks. But this was not enough for their anger. The goddess Skadi, whose father Loki had helped kill in an earlier conflict, placed a serpent above Loki's head. This serpent dripped burning venom that fell onto Loki's face, causing him agony beyond words. Only Sigyn remained with him. Faithful Sigyn, who had never wavered in her love, who had stood by him through everything. She took a bowl and sat beside her bound husband, catching the venom before it could fall on his face. There, she would remain until the end of the world, holding that bowl, protecting him from the worst of the pain. But the bowl had to be emptied. When it filled with venom, Sigyn had to turn away for a moment to pour it out. In those moments, the venom fell on Loki's face, and his writhing in pain was so violent that the earth itself shook. The humans in Midgard called these shakings earthquakes and feared them, not knowing they were caused by the bound god's suffering. So Loki remained, chained in darkness, poisoned with venom, bound by the entrails of his own son. All his cleverness could not free him. All his shape-changing could not help him. He was trapped, and would remain trapped until Ragnarok came. Hash hash the long binding. In the darkness of the cave, time moved differently. Days and nights passed above, but below there was only the endless present, the constant pain, the never-ending cycle of Sigyn catching the venom, and then emptying the bowl, while Loki suffered. In that darkness, Loki had much time to think. He thought about everything that had brought him to this place. He remembered his childhood in Jotunheim, when he was just a strange young giant who did not fit in with his brothers. He remembered his first journey to Asgard, full of curiosity and hope. He remembered becoming blood brothers with Odin, believing that he had found a place where he belonged. He remembered all the times he had helped the gods, the wall that he had saved them from paying for, at great cost to himself, the treasures he had gained for them, including Thor's beloved hammer, the many times his cleverness had solved problems that strength and wisdom could not. He remembered his children, taken from him and punished for crimes they had not committed. Fenrir bound on an island, growing ever larger in his rage. Jomungandr cast into the ocean, growing until he circled the world. Hel sent to rule the dead, half alive and half dead herself. Forever lonely in her cold realm, he remembered the small slights and rejections that had accumulated over the years. The way the gods never fully trusted him, never fully welcomed him, always kept him at a distance. The way they used his skills but did not honor him. The way they called him friend but treated him as other. And he remembered Balder, beautiful Balder, loved by everyone, the one who represented everything Loki was not. He remembered guiding Hod's hand, watching the mistletoe fly, seeing Balder fall. He remembered the moment when everything changed, when his place among the gods ended forever. In the darkness, Loki's heart grew harder still. The pain from the venom and the pain of his imprisonment, mixed with the older pain of rejection and betrayal. He began to feel that the gods had deserved what happened to them. They had created this situation by how they treated him and his children. They had sown the seeds of their own destruction. The prophecies of Ragnarok filled his thoughts. He knew what was supposed to happen at the end. The bonds would break. He would go free. Fenrir would break his chains as well, and would devour Odin himself. Jormungandr would rise from the sea and battle Thor, and they would kill each other. Hel would lead an army of the dead against the gods. Everything would burn, and the gods would fall. In his suffering, Loki began to want this. He began to look forward to Ragnarok, not with fear but with anticipation. It would be revenge for everything done to him and his children. It would be justice, of a sort, for all the pain and rejection and imprisonment. The gods would fall, and he would be there to see it. But even in his darkest thoughts, there was Sigyn. She sat beside him, hour after hour, day after day, year after year, century after century. She never left him, never abandoned him, never spoke words of blame or recrimination. She simply stayed, catching the venom, protecting him as much as she could, enduring the horror of the cave and the knowledge of what he had done. Sometimes Loki would look at her and wonder why she stayed. She could have left at any time. The gods would have welcomed her back to Asgard. She had done nothing wrong. She could have lived in comfort and light instead of in this dark cave. She could have found happiness elsewhere, left him to suffer alone as perhaps he deserved. But she never did. When he asked her why, she simply said that she had made promises. She was his wife, and she would remain his wife. She loved him, and love did not abandon even those who had done terrible things. She saw his pain and his suffering, and even if she could not understand all his choices, she would not leave him alone in his punishment. Her loyalty was perhaps the one thing that kept some small spark of humanity alive in Loki during the long binding. It reminded him that he was not just a monster, not just a source of chaos and destruction. He was also someone capable of being loved, someone worth staying beside, someone who mattered to at least one person in all the world. The years passed, turning to decades, turning to centuries. Above in Asgard, the gods continued their lives, but they knew that the end was coming. The death of Balder had been the first sign. Other signs would follow. The prophecies would unfold one by one, until finally Ragnarok would arrive. They prepared as best they could. The warriors in Valhalla trained endlessly, getting ready for the final battle. The gods gathered their weapons and their strength. Odin sought knowledge, wherever he could find it, hoping to discover some way to change fate, or at least to face it wisely. In Midgard, the humans went about their lives, mostly unaware of what was coming. They farmed their fields and built their houses. They told stories of the gods and made offerings at their shrine. They lived and loved and died, generation after generation, while the cosmos slowly wound toward its end. In Jotunheim, the giants also prepared. They knew the prophecy said that at Ragnarok, they would have their chance to destroy the gods who had been their enemies since the beginning of time. They sharpened their weapons and gathered their forces. Their leader would be Surt, the fire giant, who would burn all the worlds at the end. In the ocean, Jormungandr grew ever larger, circling the world, waiting for the time when he would rise up and bring his poison to the sky. On his island, Fenrir strained against his bonds, growing stronger and more filled with rage with each passing day. In the underworld, Hel gathered the spirits of the dead, building an army of shadows and ghosts. And in the cave, Loki remained bound, suffering and thinking, planning and waiting. The venom dripped, Sigyn caught it, and time flowed onward toward the end of all things. # the meaning in the story. But this is not the end of the story, though it comes close to it. For stories, especially old stories, especially stories about gods and giants and the fate of worlds, are not just about events. They're about meanings, about what we can learn, about what the people who first told these tales wanted to pass on to those who came after. What did they mean by the story of Loki? Why did they create this character, this being who was neither fully good nor fully evil, neither fully trusted nor fully rejected? Perhaps they meant to show that the world is not simple. Good and evil are not always clearly separated. People, and even gods, contain multitudes. Someone can be helpful and harmful, clever and cruel, worthy of both trust and suspicion, all at the same time. Loki represented the parts of existence that do not fit neatly into categories. He was the reminder that order and chaos are not opposites but partners, that creation and destruction are linked, that the same force that brings new ideas can upset old stability. The people who told these stories lived in a harsh world. They lived in the cold north, where survival was not guaranteed, where the line between plenty and starvation was thin, where nature could be both provider and destroyer. They understood that life was complicated, that you might need to work with someone you did not fully trust, that cleverness could save you, but could also lead you into trouble. Loki embodied these contradictions. He saved the gods from problems, but he also caused problems. He used his gifts for help and for harm. He was valuable and dangerous in equal measure. This made him a useful figure in stories, a way to explore the grey areas of ethics and existence. The story of his children spoke to fears about otherness and different. Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel were punished not for what they had done but for what they might do, for what prophecies said they would do. The gods acted out of fear, and their fear made the prophecies more likely to come true. If Fenrir had not been bound, would he have become the monster who would one day devour the sun? If Jormungandr had not been cast into the ocean, would he have become the world serpent? If Hel had not been sent to the underworld, would she have become the leader of the dead? These questions have no answers, because the events cannot be undone. But they serve as reminders about how we treat those who are different, how fear can create the very outcomes we fear, how punishment without crime creates resentment and anger. The story of Baldur's death is perhaps the most complicated part of Loki's tale. Why did Loki guide Hod's hand? The old stories do not give a clear answer. Was it jealousy of Baldur's perfection and universal love? Was it resentment of the god? Was it simply the nature of chaos, which must eventually disrupt even the most perfect order? Was it part of fate, something that had to happen for the story to continue? Different people might answer differently. Some see Loki as purely evil in this moment, killing the best of the gods out of spite. Others see him as tragic, driven to this action by accumulated hurts and rejections. Still others see him as simply fulfilling his role in the cosmic story, doing what the trickster must do, bringing the change that perfection cannot bring about itself. The punishment that follows speaks to justice and revenge, to how societies deal with those who break their most important rule. The gods bind Loki in the most terrible way they can imagine, using his own son against him, subjecting him to endless torture. Is this justice for the murder of Baldur? Or is it vengeance, excessive and cruel? Again, the story does not give a clear answer. It simply shows what happens, letting each listener decide what they think about it. And Sigyn, faithful Sigyn, who remains by Loki's side through his punishment, represents loyalty and love that persists even when perhaps it should not. She had done nothing wrong. Her sons had done nothing wrong. Yet she lost them and gained only the privilege of sitting in a dark cave for eternity, catching poison to protect her husband, who had killed the most beloved of the gods. Is her loyalty admirable or foolish? Is her love beautiful or misguided? The story presents it without judgment, letting us decide what we think of a love that endures through horror. These stories were told on long winter nights in the north, when the darkness came early and stayed late. They were told around fires, passed from one generation to the next, changed slightly with each telling, but keeping their core truths. They helped people make sense of a world that was often senseless, find meaning in an existence that was often harsh, and understand their own complicated natures by seeing them reflected in the gods and giants of their tales. Hush, hush, the world that waits. Beyond the cave where Loki suffers, Beyond the preparations for Ragnarok, beyond the doomed world of gods and giants, there is something else in these stories. There is the idea that endings are also beginnings, that destruction makes space for creation, that even the death of gods is not the final word. The prophecies of Ragnarok speak of more than just an ending. They speak of what comes after. When the fires burn out and the floods recede, when the old world is destroyed and the gods are dead, the stories say that something new will emerge. The earth will rise from the sea, green and growing. The daughter of the sun will follow her mother's path across the sky, bringing new light. Some of the gods will survive or return, younger gods, gods who will build something different from what came before. Humans will also survive, a man and woman who hide themselves during the destruction and emerge to repopulate the world. This cycle of destruction and renewal was important to the people who told these stories. They lived close to nature, saw how winter killed the plants each year only for spring to bring them back, saw how forest fires cleared old growth so new trees could rise, saw how death made space for life. Loki's role in bringing about Ragnarok is not just about ending things. It is about forcing change when change would not come otherwise. The world of the gods had become static, set in its ways, perhaps stagnant. The gods ruled from their golden halls, fighting the same enemies, following the same patterns, forever maintaining the same order. Loki was the agent of change in that static system. He was the chaos that disrupted order, the question that challenged certainty, the change that stability could not prevent. In this sense, his role was necessary, even if it was destructive. Without him, the story could not move forward. Without him, the old world could not end, and the new world could not begin. This does not make what he did right or good. It does not excuse the harm he caused or justify the pain he inflicted, but it places his actions in a larger context, makes them part of a pattern rather than simply random acts of malice. The old storytellers understood that the world needs both order and chaos, both creation and destruction, both gods and giants, both stability and change. They created Loki to embody the chaotic, destructive, changing side of that balance. They made him complex and contradictory, because that is what chaos is: complicated, unpredictable, capable of both help and harm. The echo through time. These stories have traveled far from their origins. The people who first told them are long dead, their halls empty, their fires cold. The old gods are no longer worshipped, their names spoken now mainly in stories and scholarly books, rather than in prayers. But the stories themselves persist. They have been written down and preserved. They have been translated into many languages. They have inspired new stories, new art, new interpretations. Loki especially has captured imaginations, appearing in countless retellings, adapted and changed, but always recognizable. Why does Loki, of all the Norse gods, remain so fascinating? Perhaps because we recognize something in him. We live in a complex world, where right and wrong are not always clear, where the same person can be both helpful and harmful, where those who do not fit in must find ways to survive among those who do. We understand the feeling of being on the outside, of being neither one thing nor another, of belonging nowhere completely. We know what it is to accumulate small hurts that grow into larger resentments. We recognize the temptation to destroy what we cannot have or cannot be part of. We also recognize Loki's cleverness, his ability to see solutions others miss, his refusal to be bound by conventional thinking. In a world that often values these traits, that celebrates innovation and disruption and thinking outside the box, Loki seems almost modern, almost relevant to our own time. But we also see the warning in his story. Cleverness without wisdom can be dangerous. Change without purpose can be destructive. Those who see themselves as outsiders can become the thing they have been accused of being. The trickster can become the villain, not because they were destined to be, but because the way they were treated pushed them in that direction. The story asks questions that remain relevant. How should we treat those who are different? How do we balance the need for order with the inevitability of change? When does punishment become revenge? Can someone who has done terrible things still be worthy of love? How much of who we become is our own choice? And how much is shaped by how others treat us? These questions have no easy answers, which is perhaps why the stories about Loki continue to resonate. They do not provide simple lessons or clear morals. They present complicated situations and complicated characters, and leave us to draw our own conclusions. Hush, hush, the end. That is not the end. So we come to where we began, with Loki bound in the darkness, suffering endlessly, waiting for the end of the world. Sigyn sits beside him with her bowl. The venom drips. The earth shakes when she must turn away to empty the bowl. And time moves forward toward the doom of the gods. When Ragnarok finally comes, the bonds will break. Loki will be free. He will join forces with the giants, with his children, with all the forces of chaos and destruction. The final battle will be fought. Gods will die. Giants will die. The world will burn and flood. Everything will be destroyed. But that is a story for another time. A story that the old tales tell in their own way. For now, we leave Loki in his cave, in his suffering, with his faithful wife beside him. We leave him as he has been for countless years and will be for years to come, until the time for endings arrives. His story is not a happy one. It is not a simple one. It is not one with a clear message about good and evil. It is a story about complexity and contradiction, about how someone can be both victim and villain, about how chains of events lead to outcomes that perhaps no one wanted, but everyone helped create. It is a story about being on the outside, about the price of difference, about the danger of accumulated resentment. It is a story about cleverness and its consequences, about help and harm intertwined, about family and loyalty in their many complicated forms. It is a story about the trickster, the shapeshifter, the one who does not fit, the bringer of change. It is the story of Loki, son of giants, blood brother of Odin, father of monsters, husband of Sigyn, the bound god waiting in the darkness. And like all the best old stories, it stays with you long after the telling is done, making you think about its meanings and mysteries, its questions without answers, its truths without certainty. The story of Loki is not finished because such stories never finish. They echo forward through time, changing with each new voice that tells them, but keeping their core, their essence, their power to make us think and feel and wonder. In the darkness of the cave, the venom drips. Sigyn catches it in her bowl. Loki waits in his suffering, thinking thoughts we cannot know, feeling pain we cannot imagine, existing in the space between what was and what will be. Above, the world continues, unaware or uncaring. The sun rises and sets. The seasons turn. Life goes on, as it always does, until the moment comes when it does not. But that moment has not arrived yet. For now, there is only the waiting, the endurance, the slow passage of time toward whatever ending the fates have woven into the fabric of existence. The story continues, even in the darkness, even in the silence, even in the suffering. And so we leave it here, in the darkness, with the dripping poison, and the faithful wife, and the bound god. And we carry the story with us into our own time, our own lives, our own attempts to understand the complicated world we inhabit, and the complicated natures we possess. The story of Loki, the trickster, the shapeshifter, the outsider, the bound god waiting for the end. A story from the cold north, from the long ago, from the time when gods walked the earth and giants threatened the world, and all of creation was younger and stranger than it is now. A story that speaks across the centuries, across cultures, across all the changes that have come to the world since it was first told. A story that ends here, for now, in this telling, though it never truly ends, never truly resolves, never truly gives us the clear answers we might want. It simply exists, as stories do, waiting to be told again, understood differently, interpreted anew by each generation that encounters it. And in its existence, in its persistence, in its refusal to be simple, or straightforward, or easy to digest, it somehow captures something true about life itself, about the world itself, about us ourselves. We are all, in our ways, a little like Loki, neither fully one thing nor another, neither completely good nor completely bad, neither wholly trusted nor wholly rejected, trying to find our place in a world that does not quite know what to do with us, trying to survive with the gifts and flaws we have been given, trying to make sense of an existence that often seems to make no sense at all. The venom drip, the bowl catches it, the earth shakes, and the story continues, as it always has, as it always will, echoing through time like the howl of a wolf, like the crash of thunder, like the whisper of wind through trees, telling us something we need to hear, even if we cannot quite understand what it is, showing us something we need to see, even if we cannot quite bear to look at it directly. This is the story of Loki, the trickster god from the north, told here in simple words for those who need simple words, told in a calm voice for those who need calmness, told at length for those who need the time to sink into the story and let it wash over them, like waves on a shore, regular and gentle and endless. May it bring you whatever you need from it, rest or reflection, peace or pondering, sleep or thought. May it carry you where you need to go, whether that is into dreams or into wakefulness, into forgetting or into remembering. May it serve its purpose, as all old stories serve their purposes, connecting us to the past and to each other, reminding us that people have always struggled with the same questions, felt the same confusions, sought the same understanding that we seek now. The story is told. The tale is complete, at least as complete as such tales ever are. Rest now, if rest is what you need. Think now, if thinking is what you need. Dream now, if dreaming is what you need. The story will remain, waiting for the next time it is needed, ready to be told again in a different voice for a different listener at a different time. This is the way of stories. They persist, they adapt, they endure. Like Loki himself, they cannot be bound or killed or silent. They change shape to fit new times, new needs, new understanding. They are tricksters in their own way, never quite what they seem, never quite what we expect, always revealing new meanings with each new telling. And so it ends, and so it begins again, and so the cycle continues, as it has since the first person told the first story around the first story around the first fire, in the long darkness of the first winter night. The story of Loki, from the north, from the cold lands where giants dwelled, and gods ruled, and all the world was strange and new, and full of wonders and terrors in equal measure. Sleep well, if sleep is your goal. Rest easy, if rest is what you seek. The story has been told, and in its telling, it has done its work, whatever work that might be. The old magic of stories has been invoked, the old power of tales has been released, and now it can do whatever it does, helping or simply being, meaningful or simply present, purposeful or simply existing. In the darkness of the cave, the venom drips. Sigyn holds her bowl steady. Loki endures. And somewhere far above, the stars wheel in their courses, indifferent and eternal, watching the small dramas of gods and giants and humans play out beneath their ancient light, seeing all, judging nothing, simply witnessing the endless unfolding of existence in all its complexity and contradiction. This is the story. This is the tale. This is the legend of Loki, preserved here in words, offered here in calmness, given here in the hope that it might serve whatever purpose such stories serve, might provide whatever comfort such tales provide, might grant whatever peace such legends bestow on those who hear them and take them into themselves. The telling is done. The story rests. And we rest with it, carried on its currents into whatever comes next, into dreams or waking, into understanding or simple being, into whatever state we need to enter as we let the story fade into memory, where all stories eventually go, where they wait until they are needed again. Sleep comes on quiet feet. Stories lead the way, with their ancient rhythms and their timeless patterns, their eternal questions and their enduring mysteries. In the story of Loki, as in all old stories, we find something of ourselves reflected back, distorted perhaps, but recognizable, human even when the characters are gods, relevant even when the setting is impossible. True even when the events are fantastic. This is the gift of old stories, the grace of ancient tales. They connect us backward to those who came before, and forward to those who will come after. They remind us that human nature does not change much, that the questions that troubled people 1,000 years ago still trouble us today, that the search for meaning and understanding is eternal and universal. And in this particular story, in the tale of Loki the Trickster, we find perhaps the most human of all the gods, the one who struggles most with his nature and his place, the one who most clearly shows the complexity and contradiction that lies at the heart of existence itself. In his suffering and his choices, in his cleverness and his cruelty, in his helpfulness and his harmfulness, we see ourselves reflected in all our own complexity. The story ends in darkness and waiting, in suffering and endurance, in the space between what was and what will be. It does not give us the comfort of resolution, or the satisfaction of justice clearly served. It simply shows us what happened, and lets us feel what we feel about it, think what we think about it, understand what we can understand of it. This is enough. This is what stories do. This is their purpose and their power. To show us life in forms we contemplate, to give us mirrors that do not quite reflect perfectly, but that show us truths we might not otherwise see, to provide us with ways of thinking about the unthinkable and understanding the incomprehensible. And with that, truly, the story ends. The words, stop. The tale conclude. The telling is complete. What remains is only the echo of the story in your mind, the trace of it in your thoughts, the mark it has left on your understanding. What you do with this story, how you interpret it, what meaning you draw from it, these are yours to decide. Rest now. Sleep now. Dream now. The story of Loki has been told, and in its telling, it has released whatever magic such stories possess. Let that magic work on you as you drift towards sleep, or toward whatever state of being you seek. Let the old tale do its old work, connecting you to all the listeners who have heard these stories before, to all those who will hear them in the future, to the endless chain of humanity seeking understanding through the ancient art of storytelling. The venom drips. Sigyn remains. Loki waits. The world turns. Stories persist. And we, the listeners, the readers, the receivers of tales, we take what we need from them and carry it with us into the rest of our lives. Changed perhaps in small ways, enriched perhaps in ways we cannot name, connected perhaps to something larger than ourselves. This is the end of the telling. This is where the words stop and the silence begins. In that silence, the story continues to work, continues to resonate, continues to be whatever it needs to be for whoever has received it. Sleep well, rest easy, dream deeply. The story has been told. Hush hush, the days before the darkness of the cave, before the binding and the venom, before the death of Balder and the doom that followed, there were other days. There were days when Loki walked freely through the 9 worlds, when his future was not yet sealed, when choices still existed that might have led to different outcomes. These were the days of adventure and possibility. The days when Loki was still becoming who he would be, when his nature was still finding its full expression. These were the days worth remembering, worth exploring, for they show us how someone becomes who they are, how small moments accumulate into larger patterns, how the seeds of endings are planted long before the harvest comes. In those days, Loki spent much time traveling. He could not stay still for long. His restless nature drove him to wander, to explore, to see what lay beyond the next mountain or across the next sea. He visited all the 9 worlds at various times, learning their secrets, meeting their inhabitants, gathering knowledge and experience. He knew Midgard well, the realm of humans. He would sometimes walk among them in disguise, learning their ways, observing how they lived. The humans fascinated him. They were so brief, their lives like mayflies compared to the long existence of gods and giants. Yet, they accomplished much in their short time. They built civilizations, created art, developed complex societies, all knowing they would die. Loki admired this about them. There was something pure in how they lived, knowing their time was limited, making choices with the understanding that consequences would come within their own lifetime. Gods and giants could put things off, could wait centuries to act, could avoid decisions because time seemed endless. Humans had no such luxury. Sometimes Loki helped humans, for no reason other than whim or curiosity. He might appear to a farmer struggling with a problem and offer a clever solution. He might whisper an idea to a craftsman that would improve their work. He might lead a lost traveler to safety through a dangerous forest. Other times, he tested them. He might appear as a beggar to see if they would show kindness to someone who seemed to have nothing. He might pose as a merchant offering deals that seemed too good to be true, watching to see if greed would overcome wisdom. He might create small problems to observe how people solved them. From these interactions, Loki learned much about the nature of morality and choice. He saw that humans were not simply good or evil, but complex, capable of both kindness and cruelty, often in the same day, sometimes in the same action. He saw that circumstances shape behavior, that someone who was generous when times were good might become selfish when times were hard, that fear could make kind people cruel and desperation could make honest people liars. These observations reinforced Loki's own sense that the world was not as simple as the gods sometimes pretended. The gods spoke of honor and duty, of right and wrong, as if these were clear and unchanging. But Loki saw how context mattered, how situations altered what was right, how survival sometimes required doing things that would be wrong in easier circumstances. He also spent time in Alfheim, the realm of the light elves. These beings were beautiful and mysterious, living in harmony with nature in ways that even the gods did not. They had magic that was different from the magic of gods or giants, magic that came from the living world itself, from plants and streams and the light of the sun. The elves tolerated Loki's visits, but did not welcome him warmly. They could sense the chaos in his nature, and it made them uncomfortable. Elves valued harmony and balance, and Loki was neither harmonious nor balanced. But they spoke with him when he came, shared some of their knowledge, taught him a few of their secrets. From the elves, Loki learned about the interconnectedness of things. He learned that actions in one place could have consequences far away, that small changes could ripple outward in unexpected ways. He learned that nature had its own wisdom, its own patterns, its own kind of order that was different from the order the gods imposed. He visited Svartalfheim too, the realm of the dark elves or dwarfs who lived beneath the mountain. He had gone there several times to commission their crafts, and over time he developed relationships with various dwarf clans. They respected his cleverness and appreciated that he understood the value of their work. The dwarfs taught Loki about patience and precision. They showed him how the greatest works required time and careful attention, how rushing led to flaws, how mastery came from endless practice. They demonstrated that there was honor in craft, that creating something beautiful or useful was its own reward, that work done well was a kind of prayer to the forces of creation. Loki appreciated these lessons, though his own nature often pulled him toward quick solutions and immediate results. He could see the value of patience but found it hard to practice. He admired precision, but was more comfortable with improvisation. Still, watching the dwarfs work, seeing their dedication and skill, gave him respect for ways of being that were different from his own. He even ventured to Muspelheim, the realm of fire, though he did not stay long there. It was too hot, too bright, too intense, even for him. The fire giants who lived there were beings of pure destruction, and while Loki could appreciate destruction as a necessary force, he found their single-minded devotion to it exhausting. Surt, the ruler of Muspelheim, barely acknowledged Loki's visits. The great fire giant had only one purpose, one goal, one destiny: to burn all the worlds at Ragnarok. He waited for that moment with the patience of flame, which burns as long as there is fuel and cares nothing for time. Loki found him fascinating, but unsettling, a preview of the destruction that prophecy said would one day consume everything. Niflheim, the realm of ice and mist, was another place Loki visited rarely. It was too cold, too empty, too devoid of the life and change that interested him. The ice there was ancient, frozen since the beginning of time, and it would remain frozen until the end. Nothing grew in Niflheim. Nothing changed. It was stasis made into a realm, and Loki, who embodied change, found it deeply uncomfortable. But he went there sometimes anyway, drawn by curiosity, or perhaps by some need to understand all aspects of existence. In the endless ice fields, in the frozen silence, Loki could hear his own thoughts more clearly. There were no distractions, no other voices, no demands on his attention. Just the cold, and the silence, and his own mind. In those frozen moments, Loki sometimes wondered about his own nature. Why was he the way he was? Why could he not be content like others seemed to be? Why did he always need to push boundaries, test limits, see what would happen if he did the thing he was not supposed to do? He had no answers to these questions. He was simply made this way, born to be the trickster, the shapeshifter, the one who did not fit. Asking why was like asking why fire burned or water flowed. It was simply the nature of the thing. Hush hush the other adventures. There were so many adventures in those days before the binding, so many stories that could be told. Some were grand, and some were small. Some were remembered in songs and sagas, while others were forgotten, known only to those who were there. There was the time Loki and Thor journeyed to the hall of Utgard Loki, a giant king whose name was confusingly similar to Loki's own. There they were challenged to contests that they could not win, because everything was an illusion. Thor tried to drink from a horn that was secretly connected to the ocean itself, tried to lift a cat that was actually the world's serpent in disguise, tried to wrestle an old woman who was actually old age personified. Loki was challenged to an eating contest against a giant named Logi. They were each given a trencher full of meat, and they raced to eat it all. Loki ate quickly, devouring all the meat on his side. But Loki ate not just the meat, but the bones and the trencher itself, consuming everything. Later, it was revealed that Loki was actually wildfire, which consumes all it touches. These contests were humbling, showing Thor and Loki that there were forces greater than themselves, that even the mighty could be made to seem weak through cleverness and illusion. Thor was angry when he learned they had been tricked, but Loki was almost pleased. He appreciated the artistry of the deception, even as he was annoyed to have been its victim. There was the time a giant named Thiassi kidnapped Idun, the goddess who kept the golden apples of youth. These apples kept the gods young and strong. Without them, the gods began to age, their hair turning gray, their strength fading, their minds growing slow. It was Loki who had caused this problem, having made a deal with Thiassi without fully understanding the consequences. And it was Loki who had to fix it, transforming into a falcon and flying to Thiassi's hall in the mountains to rescue Idun. He changed her into a nut and carried her home in his talons, with Thiassi in the form of an eagle close behind. The gods set fire to a pile of wood shavings, just as Loki flew over the walls of Asgard. The flames rose up and caught Thiassi's feathers, and the giant fell to the ground where Thor killed him. Loki had saved the day, but only after endangering it in the first place. This was typical of his adventures, problems that he caused and then solved, crises that would not have existed without him, but that also could not be resolved without him. There was the time Loki found a cave where a god named Kvasir had been murdered. Kvasir was the wisest of all beings, created from the combined spit of all the gods and giants as part of a peace treaty. 2 dwarfs had killed him and drained his blood, mixing it with honey to create the mead of poetry, a drink that would grant wisdom and the ability to speak beautifully to anyone who drank it. Loki did not recover the mead himself. That was a different adventure. But he discovered what had happened and brought the news to Asgard. The knowledge he provided eventually led to Odin recovering the mead, though the Allfather had to use his own tricks and deceptions to do so. There was the time Loki cut off Sif's hair, which we have already spoken of, and the consequences that followed. There was the time he mocked the gods at a feast, insulting each of them in turn, speaking truths they did not want to hear about their failings and hypocrisies. Thor eventually drove him away from that feast by threatening him with his hammer, but not before Loki had said things that could not be unsaid, revealed secrets that could not be hidden again. There were quieter adventures too. There was the time Loki spent a summer living as a fisherman in Midgard, learning the patience required to wait for fish to bite, the skill needed to read the water and weather, the satisfaction of providing food through your own effort. There was the time he studied with a witch who taught him more about the magic of transformation, helping him refine his shape-shifting abilities. There was a winter he spent in a dwarf hall, not commissioning any work but simply learning their craft, watching them shape metal and stone, asking questions about their techniques. The dwarfs were surprised but pleased by his genuine interest, and they taught him things they would not have shared with someone who came only to place orders. There was a spring he spent in Vanaheim, the home of the Vanir gods, who were different from the Aesir of Asgard. The Vanir were gods of nature and fertility, more connected to the earth and its cycles. They had been at war with the Aesir long ago, but peace had been made and hostages had been exchanged. Freya, who now lived in Asgard, had originally been Vanir. The Vanir accepted Loki more easily than the Aesir did. They were less concerned with hierarchy and honor, more accepting of different ways of being. They taught him about the magic of growing things, about how to encourage seeds to sprout and plants to flourish. This was not magic that came naturally to Loki, whose talents lay more in destruction and transformation than in growth and nurturing. But he found it interesting nonetheless. In all these adventures and experiences, in all these travels and learnings, Loki was gathering knowledge and skills, building his understanding of the 9 worlds and all they contain. He was becoming more of what he was meant to be, though he did not know where that path was leading. He thought, in those days, that he was simply living, simply existing as himself, simply following his nature where it led. He did not realize that he was moving toward a destiny, that every choice was leading to the cave and the binding, that the end was being written even as the middle was being lived. But perhaps no one realizes this as they live their life. Perhaps we all move toward destinations we cannot see, making choices that seem free, but that are part of patterns larger than ourselves. Perhaps the tragedy of Loki is simply the tragedy of existence itself, writ large and clear enough to see, showing us what is true for all beings in all times. That we become what we are through countless small moments, and by the time we understand where we have arrived, it is too late to choose a different path. The threads of fate. The Norse people who told these stories believed in fate, in word, in the idea that some things were written before they happened. They believed in the Norns, 3 women, who sat at the base of the great world tree Yggdrasil, and wove the fates of all beings, gods and giants and humans alike. The Norns were named Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, representing past, present, and future. They watered the roots of Yggdrasil with water from the well of fate, keeping the world tree alive. And they wove their threads, creating the pattern of what was, what is, and what will be. Even the gods were subject to the Norns. Even Odin, with all his power and wisdom, could not change what they had woven. He could see parts of what was coming, could gain knowledge of the future through his sacrifices and his quests. But he could not alter it. He could only prepare for it, only try to face it with courage and wisdom when it arrived. Loki, like all beings, had his thread in the pattern the Norns wove. His fate was written there. His choices and their consequences. His rise and his fall. His binding and his eventual release at Ragnarok. The question, one that the old stories do not answer clearly, is how much freedom existed within that fate. Could Loki have chosen differently? When he guided Hod's hand to throw the mistletoe, was he choosing freely, or was he simply doing what the pattern required? When he made the decision to trick the gods about the wall, when he cut off Saif's hair, when he helped and when he harmed, were these true choices? Or was he following the thread that had been woven for him before he was born? Different thinkers have answered this question differently. Some say that fate in the Norse understanding was absolute, that everything was determined, that free will was an illusion. Others say that fate was more like a destination than a path, that you might end up at the place the Norns had woven for you, but could choose how you got there. Still others suggest that fate and choice existed together in paradox, that both were true simultaneously, that you chose freely and yet could not choose otherwise, that the thread was woven, but you were the one doing the weaving. For Loki, trapped in his cave, having endless time to think about such questions, the answer might not matter much. Whether he chose his path or was forced onto it, whether he was free or fated, the result was the same. He was bound. He was suffering, and the end was coming. But perhaps in those long hours of darkness and pain, Loki found some comfort in the idea of fate. Perhaps it helped to think that his choices were not entirely his own, that forces larger than himself had shaped his story. Perhaps it was easier to bear the weight of Balder's death, and all that followed, if he could believe that it had to happen, that the Norns had woven it into the pattern of existence. Or perhaps it made things worse. Perhaps the idea that he was fated to betray the gods, to kill Balder, to bring about Ragnarok, perhaps this was more horrifying than the alternative. Perhaps he would have preferred to believe his choices were his own, even if those choices had led to terrible outcomes, rather than believe he was simply acting out a script written by others. The stories do not tell us what Loki thought about during his binding. They only show us that he suffered, and that Sigyn stayed with him, and that the earth shook when the venom touched his face. His inner life, his thoughts and feelings, his understanding of himself and his situation, these remain hidden. But we can imagine, in the darkness and the pain, in the endless waiting, surely Loki reflected on his life. Surely he thought about the choices that had led him to this place. Surely he wondered about things he might have done differently, paths he might have taken, words he might have spoken or left unspoken. He might have thought about his first days in Jotunheim, when he was just a strange child who did not fit in. He might have wondered what would have happened if he had never gone to Asgard, if he had stayed among the giants and learned to be content there. He might have reflected on his decision to become Odin's blood brother, on what he had hoped to gain from that bond, and what he had actually received. He surely thought about his children, torn from him and punished for prophecies they had not fulfilled. He must have felt rage at their treatment, grief at their suffering. Fenrir bound on an island, Jormungandr cast into the sea, Hel sent to rule the dead, and now his sons with Sigyn destroyed as well, one transformed into a beast and the other killed, their relationship twisted into something monstrous. He might have thought about Sigyn, faithful beyond all reason, sitting beside him in the darkness. He might have wondered why she stayed, what kept her there when she could be anywhere else. He might have felt gratitude or guilt, or both. Might have wished she would leave so she would not have to endure this. Might have been desperately grateful that she did not. He certainly thought about the gods. About Odin, who had brought him to Asgard, and then watched him with constant suspicion. About Thor, who had been his companion and his friend, but had never truly understood him. About all of them who had used his gifts and tolerated his presence, but never fully accepted him, never truly welcomed him as one of their own. Did he regret guiding Hard's hand? Did he wish he had let Balder live? Or did he feel, even in his suffering, that what he had done was somehow necessary, somehow right, somehow part of a pattern larger than his own desire? These questions echo through time, unanswered, and perhaps unanswerable. They are part of what makes Loki's story compelling, what keeps it alive in imagination and retelling. He is not a simple villain or a simple victim, but something more complex, something that resists easy categorization or understanding. Hush, hush, the world tree and the well. While Loki suffered in his cave, the world continued around him. The great world tree, Yggdrasil, still stood at the center of all things, its branches reaching up into the heavens, its roots digging deep into the earth, connecting all the 9 worlds together. Yggdrasil was ash tree, the mightiest tree in existence. Its trunk was so large that armies could march around it for days and not complete the circuit. Its branches were so vast that they created shelter for entire realms. Its roots reached into 3 wells: the well of fate where the Norns dwelt, the well of wisdom from which Odin had drunk at the cost of his eye, and the spring of Hvergelmir, where the rivers of the world originated. The tree was always under attack. A great serpent named Nidhogg gnawed at its roots, trying to destroy it. Deer ate its leaves and bark. Yet the tree endured, sustained by the care of the Norns and by its own deep vitality, by the primal force of life that it represented. Yggdrasil was sacred to all the peoples of the north. It represented the structure of existence itself, the connection between all things, the living framework on which reality hung. As long as the tree stood, the world would endure. When it finally fell, that would be the end of everything. Sometimes in his cave, when the pain was especially bad, when Sigyn had to turn away to empty the bowl, and the venom burned his face, Loki might have thought about Yggdrasil. He might have imagined the tree above him, its vast branches spreading across the sky, its roots reaching down through all the world. He might have remembered climbing in those branches when he was younger, when he was free, when he could take the form of a bird or a squirrel and scurry up the bark to see the worlds from above. From high in Yggdrasil's branches, you could see Asgard gleaming gold, Midgard green and blue, the other realms spread out like jewels on a vast tapestry. He might have thought about how he had loved climbing there, loved the freedom of movement, loved being high above everything where the problems of the world seemed small and distant. He might have missed that freedom with a longing sharp as the venom that burned his face. The tree represented order, stability, connection, all the things that Loki was not. Yet even Loki needed the tree. Even chaos required structure to exist again. Even the shapeshifter needed a stable world to shift within. Without Yggdrasil, without the order it represented, even Loki would cease to exist. This was perhaps the paradox at the heart of his nature. He pushed against order, tested its boundaries, broke its rules, but he could not actually survive without it. He needed the thing he disrupted. He required the stability he undermined. He was defined by his opposition to structure, which meant he needed structure to have any definition at all. At the base of the tree, the Norns continued their work, weaving the fates of all beings. They knew what was coming. They had always known. Baldur's death was no surprise to them. Loki's binding was not unexpected. Ragnarok was woven into the pattern from the beginning, an ending written into the story from its first word. Did this knowledge burden them? Did the Norns grieve for what they had to weave? Or were they beyond such feelings, their consciousness so different from gods and giants and humans, that concepts like grief and regret meant nothing to them? The stories do not say. The Norns appear in the tales as figures of power and mystery, but their inner lives remain closed to us. They are like forces of nature, doing what they must do, following their own necessity, indifferent to the emotions their weaving create. Above the tree, a great eagle sat in the highest branches. Between its eyes perched a hawk named Vedrfolnir. The eagle watched over all the worlds from its high perch, seeing everything that happened under the sun and stars. And on the trunk of the tree, a squirrel named Ratatosk ran up and down, carrying messages between the eagle above and the serpent Nidhogg below, stirring up conflict between them with his tales and gossip. Ratatosk was in his way like a tiny version of Loki, the creature who thrived on causing trouble, who enjoyed stirring up conflict between greater powers, who found purpose in disruption. But Ratatosk was only a squirrel, limited in his scope, able to cause only small problems compared to the chaos Loki could create. Still, the squirrel served a purpose. His running up and down the tree, his constant motion, his endless gossiping. These things were part of the life of Yggdrasil, part of the dynamic tension that kept the tree alive and vital. Even irritation and conflict had their place in the great pattern. Perhaps this was true of Loki as well. Perhaps his role as troublemaker, as trickster, as the one who disrupted and challenged and broke rules, perhaps this too was necessary for the health of existence. Perhaps without him, the order of the gods would have become too rigid, too fixed, too dead. Perhaps chaos in measured amounts was required for life to continue. But Loki had not provided measured amount. He had killed Baldur. He had brought about the death that signaled the doom of all things. He had gone too far, disrupted too much, broken the one thing that should not have been broken. And now he paid the price for that excess, bound in darkness while the world moved toward its end. Hush hush, the final days before the end. Time in the cave was difficult to measure. Days and nights happened somewhere above. But in the darkness below, there was only the eternal present, the constant pain, the endless repetition of Sigyn catching the venom and emptying the bowl. But time did pass, even there. Years became decades, decades became centuries, centuries began to pile up into ages, and in the world above, changes were happening. Signs were appearing that the end was approaching, that Ragnarok was drawing near. The winters grew longer and colder. There came a time when winter followed winter with no summer in between. This was called the Fimbul Winter, the Great Winter, the terrible winter that would last for 3 years. Snow fell constantly. Ice covered the lands. The sun gave little warmth, as if it were being drained of its power, as if something were devouring it from the inside. People suffered in this endless winter. Crops failed. Animals died. Communities turned on each other, fighting over the dwindling resources, abandoning the bonds of family and friendship in their desperation to survive. It was a time of darkness in both literal and moral senses, when the best parts of humanity were buried under layers of cold and fear. In Asgard, the gods watched these signs with growing dread. They knew what the Fimbulwinter meant. It was one of the clear signals that Ragnarok was coming. Other signs appeared as well. The stars seemed to be moving wrongly in their courses. The moon and sun raced across the sky more quickly, as if they were being chased. And they were being chased. The wolves Skoll and Hati, who had pursued the sun and moon since the beginning of time, were catching up. The wolves ran faster now, drawing closer, their jaws snapping at the celestial body. Soon, they would catch their prey. Soon they would devour the sun and moon, plunging the world into complete darkness. In the ocean, sailors reported strange disturbances. The sea was becoming more violent, waves rising to heights never seen before. They spoke of seeing something moving beneath the water, something impossibly large stirring in the depth. Jormungandr was waking, preparing to rise from his long sleep at the bottom of the sea. On his island, Fenrir strained against his bonds more violently than ever. The magical ribbon Gleipnir still held, but it stretched now, thinner than before. The wolf had grown so large that when he howled, the sound could be heard across worlds. His rage had grown with his body, fed by centuries of imprisonment, focused now on a single purpose: to break free and destroy those who had bound him. In the realm of the dead, Hel prepared her army. The spirits of all those who had died of sickness or old age, all those who had not earned places in Valhalla or the other honored halls. These gathered under her command. They were a vast host, shadows and ghosts, neither fully alive nor fully dead, ready to march when the time came. In Muspelheim, Surt sharpened his flaming sword. The fire giant had waited since the beginning of time for this moment. His purpose was singular and clear: to burn all the worlds, to reduce everything to ashes and embers, to purify existence through destruction. He gathered his armies of fire giants around him, beings of living flame, ready to march forth and fulfill their destiny. In Jotunheim, the ice giants and stone giants and mountain giants all prepared for war. They had been enemies of the gods since the first conflicts, since the time when order and chaos first came into opposition. Now they would have their chance to settle that ancient war once and for all, to prove that the wild forces of nature were stronger than the civilized forces of the god. And in Asgard, the gods made their own preparations. The warriors in Valhalla trained harder than ever, knowing that soon they would face their final battle. Odin consulted his ravens and rode across the world, seeking any last scraps of knowledge that might help. Thor tested his hammer again and again, preparing to face the world's serpent, knowing from prophecy that they would kill each other. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation and dread. Everyone knew what was coming. The prophecies had spoken of this for so long that every sign was recognized, every portent understood. There would be no escape, no last-minute solution, no clever trick that would save them. The end was written, and it would come. In the cave, Loki felt the stirring in the earth. Even bound as he was, even in his darkness and isolation, he could sense the approaching doom. Perhaps it was in the way the rock around him trembled. Perhaps it was in the air itself, charged with the energy of ending things. Perhaps it was simply that he knew that his role in bringing this about gave him a connection to it, made him aware of its approach. The story ends in darkness and waiting, in suffering and endurance, in the space between what was and what will be. It does not give us the comfort of resolution or the satisfaction of justice clearly served. It simply shows us what happened and lets us feel what we feel about it, think what we think about it, understand what we can understand of it. This is enough. This is what stories do. This is their purpose and their power: to show us life in forms we can contemplate, to give us mirrors that do not quite reflect perfectly, but that show us truths we might not otherwise see, to provide us with ways of thinking about the unthinkable and understanding the incomprehensible. And with that, truly, the story ends. The words stop. The tale concludes. The telling is complete. What remains is only the echo of the story in your mind, the trace of it in your thoughts, the mark it has left on your understanding. What you do with this story, how you interpret it, what meaning you draw from it, these are yours to decide. Rest now, sleep now, dream now. The story of Loki has been told, and in its telling, it has released whatever magic such stories possess. Let that magic work on you, as you drift toward sleep, or toward whatever state of being you seek. Let the old tale do its old work, connecting you to all the listeners who have heard these stories before, to all those who will hear them in the future, to the endless chain of humanity seeking understanding through the ancient art of storytelling. The venom drips. Sigian remain. Loki waits. The world turns. Stories persist. And we, the listeners, the readers, the receivers of tales, we take what we need from them and carry it with us into the rest of our lives. Changed perhaps in small ways, enriched perhaps in ways we cannot name, connected perhaps to something larger than ourselves. This is the end of the telling. This is where the words stop and the silence begins. In that silence, the story continues to work, continues to resonate, continues to be whatever it needs to be for whoever has received it. Sleep well. Rest easy. Dream deeply. The story has been told.